I'm telling you today, activism is being criminalized so that we are being equated with the Al-Qaeda and with sex offenders. This country is on the fast track to fascism. You look at all the key criteria when you compare countries like Germany and Italy and what defines fascism, like jingoism and militarism and state control of media. And you see that our country satisfies every criterion for what defines a fascist country. And it's frightening. Only the organized forces of resistance are going to stop this juggernaut toward fascism in this country. We need all elements: human rights, animal rights, earth liberation, radical environmentalism. We need all of them because it is one struggle and one fight. And we share a common enemy. That enemy is hierarchical thinking and values, which creates racism and sexism and fear of the other, homophobia, hierarchical mentalities, and capitalism. Capitalism promotes patriarchy and racism and promotes every evil on this planet. So we've all got common enemies, and we need to identify them and work at them accordingly. I uphold the distinction between what is legal and what is right. And I realize that these two things rarely overlap in this country. What is legal and what is ethical, that they're not the same thing, is obvious. In textbook cases like in Nazi Germany, South African apartheid, and U.S. racism and patriarchy. And what is legal is not what is ethical. That's obvious. So when the law is wrong, we have two options. We either change it or we break it. And sometimes to change the law, you have to break the law. Thoreau, Gandhi, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela were just a few radical routine lawbreakers who violated what was legal in order to obey the higher code of what was ethical. Martin Luther King referred to direct action as the marvelous new militancy of the civil rights movement. The marvelous new militancy, he called it. He argued that non-cooperation with evil was just as much an ethical obligation as cooperation with the good. It's not enough just to do the good. We must also actively resist evil. And to do that, damn it, all too often, we have to break laws. And he learned to embrace the label of extremist that we all get. He said yes in time. He said, I am an extremist. I'm an extremist in love. And I'm an extremist in my passion for justice. Yeah, I'm an extremist. You can call all of us extremists, too, when we define that word properly. Because in extreme times like ours, we need extreme actions. And we need what King called creative extremists. And Martin Luther King articulated a vision in the 1960s of what he called the World House. The World House was a global cosmopolitan community that was united by shared values of peace and justice. The World House was a planet that was no longer divided by sexism, racism, and class divisions. It was a beautiful utopia that Martin Luther King articulated in the 1960s. But you know what? Until we extend that radical vision deeper and farther, that World House is still just a damn slaughterhouse. Because even within King's World House, animals are still being slaughtered. 48 billion farmed animals are killed every year around the world. 48 billion farmed animals. That's 8 times the human population being killed every year. That's more than 130 million animals a day, more than 5 million every hour, 100,000 animals a minute, and billions more die in the name of so-called science, so-called entertainment, so-called sport, and so-called fashion. Every second is a 9/11 attack for the animals. And I don't make any apologies for that analogy. This is a holocaust for animals, and I refuse to apologize for drawing that comparison. Animal rights is the next logical step in human evolution. I've read books, for instance, argued by Francis Fukuyama, where he talked about we've reached the pinnacle of human evolution. The end of evolution, as the title of one of his books has it. That liberal capitalism is the summit of human creation. That we can go no farther than the pluralist capitalist democracy that we've created. Well, like all so-called progressive humanists, he forgot one thing, and that is that we're still destroying the planet. And so the next two stages in human evolution that if we don't take, we will fail to survive, are that we need to now leap into the politics of nature. We need one, a land ethic, and two, animal rights. And once we take these next steps, maybe we can talk about the end of evolution. We've gone so far with expanding the human community away from the rights just of white male property owners, and over centuries of struggle to people of color and to women and to gays and lesbians, to the physically challenged. And we've expanded this community. Yes, it's imperfect. Yes, there are lots of struggles to come within the human community. But please don't seal these boundaries within a progressive humanist framework and suffer the illusion of believing that we are at the end of moral evolution, because we've just started. Oh, we've got the next step to take, which is the hardest step, and that is getting outside of our own narrow, selfish species interests and really re-articulating our relationships to the natural world. Animal rights represents the marker of moral progress that we can see in this world today, the universalization of rights. To the extent that rights become universalized to include the whole community, not just the human community, but the bio-community. That is how we can gauge that we're making moral progress. And so that is why I say animal rights is the next step in human moral evolution. And it challenges the last ugly prejudice that we have that really has yet to be challenged, and that is speciesism. The belief that one species is superior to another species, to all other species, because of their species reality or species nature alone. And that gives them the right to discriminate or use against or use other species as they see fit. So our society is undergoing right now a great learning process, just as we learn that differences in our color, our skin color, and the differences in our gender are irrelevant to moral reality and to the establishment of a moral community. So we're learning that differences in species also are all morally irrelevant. And I make a distinction between factual differences and what is morally relevant. Obviously there are differences between human and non-human animals, but they're irrelevant. Just as all the differences amongst people here in this room are irrelevant to who has rights and who doesn't. The differences between human and non-human animals are irrelevant to the fact that they do have fundamental rights. So our similarities with the animals are much more important than our differences. And our similarities say that, number one, we are all sentient. And beyond that, number two, we are all subjects of a life. We have complex social and psychological characteristics. We are subjects of a life. And that's what unites us, and that's all that really matters. In the bio-community, in the expanding boundaries of rights, that we are all subjects of a life. Martin Luther King said, an injustice to one is an injustice to all, and that applies now to all species. Liberation is total. It's for all beings, or it's for none at all. Our fates are interconnected, and what we do to the animals, we do to ourselves. When we kill animals by the billions and eat them, we die of unnecessary diseases that we acquire through consuming animal fat. When we destroy their habitat, we destroy the environment for ourselves. When we're violent to animals, we bring that violence into our own culture, into our own communities, into our own families. We poison our own psyches and our own souls. The ALF and the ELF expand on, they do not negate, they expand on the noble American traditions of sabotage and civil disobedience and property destruction for a higher ethical cause and all kinds of resistance. They extend the right to freely exist to the entire bio community. One of the hottest political battles today, no doubt, is over the politics of nature. And we are quickly finding that we are in the middle of a new civil war in this country. A new civil war. On the one side, you have people who will do anything and everything to rape this planet for their own selfish interests and for their own profit. And on the other side, you find an increasingly militant community of activists who will resist this genocide, this omnicide, tooth and nail. And so we are beginning to divide as a nation over the politics of nature. And we are forming a guerrilla war against our oppressors. We can't fight them tank to tank, gun to gun. We have to go underground. They do not know how to fight and win a guerrilla war. The U.S. imperialist state got its ass kicked in Vietnam. It's getting its ass kicked right now in Iraq. And it's going to get its ass kicked again by the underground resistance movements for animal and earth liberation. We need to multiply this resistance so that in every town, in every community, there is an ALF and an ELF smashing the engines of destruction. In 1973, the ALF emerged in England. They emerged, as you likely know, out of the Hunt Saboteurs movement. And when the Hunt Sabs were getting their asses kicked by the hunters and the state was doing nothing about it, when they realized that their tactics were not as effective as they hoped, they decided to go underground. They decided they were going to have to do something more radical to stop these hunts. So they started destroying the equipment of the hunters, and they sabotaged boats of sealers. And they started to engage in property destruction, and they started to engage in arson. And they escalated their attacks to vivisection industries, Ronnie Lee, and a few others who named themselves first the Band of Mercy and then renamed themselves the Animal Liberation Front. And they had a twofold purpose. One was liberating animals, the other was sabotage of the property of oppressors, of those who were exploiting animals. This is a nonviolent philosophy, and some of you may have a hard time with this paradox. If it is even that, it's not a contradiction. They're a nonviolent group. It's, it's no accident that in over 30 years of militant actions, including hundreds, thousands of arson attacks, the ALF has never hurt or harmed a single human being. They ought not to be criticized for their radicalism. They ought to be commended for their restraint. It's no accident they never hurt anyone. This is a nonviolent group. And that definition means that property destruction is not violence. If you want to define property destruction as violence, somehow you're going to have to put a brain and central nervous system within a thing. Because it is not a sentient being. It cannot feel violence. So we can get into the semantics of that. That's a whole separate question. But I do not consider it violence. Some people in the movement do. But the idea here is that no one has the right to use property to harm other living beings and harm any other form of life. And that anyone who does claim that right, someone else has a higher right to take that property away from them. So if a sealer is using a club with a spike on the end, a metal spike, to bash in a baby seal's skull, what am I supposed to say? His property rights override the rights of that baby seal to live? Hell no. I'm going to grab that club, I'm going to throw it in the water. Because the right to life supersedes the right to property. So when the ALF goes into a laboratory and steals animals, they're not stealing anything because those animals are no one's property in the first place. And when they smash and destroy equipment that is used to kill and maim animals, That's not vandalism, because there's a higher ethical purpose. I call it sabotage. Ethical sabotage. The ALF and ELF are today's marvelous new militancy. They're the new marvelous militancy in the context of the politics of nature. The ALF are not terrorists. They're counter-terrorists. They're freedom fighters. We know who the real terrorists are. They're the ones in the highest office of the state and running the multinational corporations. Was it wrong for the Underground Railroad in this country in the 19th century to help the slaves escape? They were someone's property. Was it wrong for the Nazi resistance movement to destroy the railroad equipment and the gas ovens of the Nazi oppressors that were killing human beings? No. Then why is it wrong for the ALF to destroy property of those industries that are killing animals? Let's think straight. Why is it that we support and lionize those people who fight in the Underground Railroad against the Nazis? But when it comes to those who will fight for animals, suddenly we get moralistic about that property destruction. Maybe it's because there's a latent speciesism in our minds. That is, it's okay to destroy property or even to kill or protect human life, but oh no, not for animals. But I do believe in animal rights. That's a logical inconsistency. If we want to compare the ALF to something, as people like to compare it today, don't compare it to the Al-Qaeda. Don't compare it to Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard. Compare them to the Nazi resistance fighters. Compare them to the Underground Railroad movement. Compare them to today's peace and justice movements. Because the ALF is all about bringing peace and justice to the entire bio community. It is a peace and justice movement. This planet is in a crisis state. We live in an era of rainforest destruction, incredible overpopulation, and species extinction. The earth is burning. Are we going to play fiddles? Are we going to grab the fire hoses? Are we going to watch it on TV? Are we going to crash the corporate party? Are we sheep or are we revolutionaries? Nothing against being a sheep. We are the patriots. We are the future. We are the only ones who can save this planet, those of us who resist this insanity. We must attack the real terrorists, those in the highest offices of the land. Let's stop acting like we're in a conversation, because we're in a war. Liberation politics, it's not a game, it's not a trend, it's not a hobby. It's a long, bloody, protracted war. The Patriot Act is meant to intimidate us. That only means we have to escalate our struggle all the more. They want us to feel afraid. I want them to feel afraid of us. I want them to feel the fear. They talk about us being intimidating, using politics of coercion and intimidation. Who's intimidating who? Didn't we just get intimidated here the last 2 days? And we're terrorists because we use intimidation? We're not using enough intimidation. I want them having nightmares. I want them fearful that we're creeping into their bedrooms every minute. I say to them, I say to the state and to the industries that are exploiting the animals and the earth, we're in a war. We're coming. No matter what you do, regardless of anything you say, we're coming anyway. I don't want the crumbs off your table. I want the whole goddamn loaf of liberation. And we're coming to take it. Can I hear it from the terrorists in the room? Can I hear it from the warriors? Can I hear from the extremists? Can I hear from the patriots? The revolution! One struggle, one fight! 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 Thank you very much.